The main focus of today's webinar is how to look at automated financial processes with continuous transactional insight. Sounds like a mouthful, but in the third in the series of this robotic process automation webinar series is all about how we can use those next generation GRC tools to start seeing some automation controls and some additional governance insights coming in here. So we've got to get another few scenarios. Again, previous to the earlier webinars, we were talking about access risk and how that is more powerful when it's an access control. But we're going to take this on and move it through into a next few stages, really, which is looking more into the automated configuration monitoring, a bit more of master data insights, and then trying to get those bots to actually do the decision making for us. So actually being able to propose decisions and call out outliers. And if we get time, we've got another scenario at the end here about embargoed payee payment blocks. So looking at how we can actually enforce the right level of governance without necessarily having human eyes across every single element of it. So let's get cracking. So the first way that we're going to be looking at the RPA scenario from a governance and compliance perspective is looking at configuration monitoring and actually talking through those sorts of scenarios about how we can automate that particular part in the process. So when we're talking about configuration monitoring, we're assuming that there are a lot of different transactional postings that are happening into the business environments, and some of those are driven by different configuration settings. So for example, financial posting periods. If you've got those under control, then people are only allowed to post financial documents into the current period, so February, March, April in your calendar year, and that you can't put financial documents into previous posting periods, so you can't hide spend or can't forward state profits against things that don't actually exist. So it's really important to be able to make sure that your systems are set optimally to be able to actually govern that the right kind of control standards are in place throughout the whole. And this could be done manually through daily checks, somebody logging in, checking those periods, making sure they're completely correct, or we could try and use robotic process automation and get the bot to take the heavy lifting and highlighting it to us when there's a problem. So various different ways of doing it. We've got the manual side of things here, so periodic review of the configuration to check that that's still appropriate, manual tests after the event tests, so you don't really get complete coverage, or you can schedule those sorts of activities to be manually executed based upon an automated trigger. So you could schedule the requirement that somebody needs to go in and test it. But actually, what's more powerful is if we can use the system to automatically monitor those settings and then only tell us if there's a problem. So managing via exception, reducing the manual effort involved to almost zero, and being able to place greater reliance upon those controls that you've actually got the right things going there. So posting periods is one example, or positing posting periods as the typo on the slide suggests, but we've also got many other examples with client protection settings or other configuration environments. So let's take a look at that. We've got a couple here that we can actually look at: exchange rate maintenance and security of vendor payment details. So if we just log into our environment, we can see a lot of these different steps. So in the Fiori world, from an SAP perspective, using GRC 12 functionality, we've got all of these automated business rules that we've got set up here. So if we were to look at the exchange rates, for example, so that first scenario, here we have the exchange rates, and we can look into that and say, actually, this system has got the exchange rate maintenance already configured. We know what the exchange rate should be, and we've actually gone the next stage further and integrated this with access control. So not just what the exchange rate is, but actually who can also make changes to that. And what we've got here is the fact that we've got two different issues raised with a different priority set, well actually the same priority set, and it's been highlighted to me as the control owner. So if we look into the evaluation, we just have to refresh the screen to make sure that that's actually contemporary. And here we go. So we look forward into the evaluation and we can see the two different failures against this particular setting. So if we click on the results there, we can see that 892 users have got the possibility of actually making an update to that SAP table to do with exchange rates. So that might be appropriate. It might actually be that actually there are a load of different people in the organization who shouldn't have that ability. So we can then take remediation steps to actually manage that, remove the access, and we're performing a much more effective control because the bot has actually highlighted that issue to us. Now, if we look at the other one as well, we're correlating into the actual configuration settings themselves. So as well as the theoretical risk about people being able to make changes to that exchange rate, we're also looking to govern whether that exchange rate is applicable and appropriate. So the currency exchange rate between Great British pounds to US dollars, very, very different. So it's out of all the norms that we would expect from an exchange rate. $1.5 to the pound, that would be lovely, but unrealistic in today's economic climate. Anyway, we won't get into that discussion today. So we can see that the bot has highlighted a deficiency within the actual configuration settings itself, and we've got a separate bot that's actually going through and checking the theoretical capability of users being able to influence that. So there we can see we can improve the governance of that exchange rate changes control by being able to actually automate that check. So similar to that, we can have different rules looking at the vendors. So we've got another one here. So vendor bank detail changes. And again, depends on your processes, but you could have a particular governance challenge whereby you need people to configure the vendors in a specific way. So having a checkbox that's allowing people to actually maintain the vendors correctly. So determining whether there are changes to vendor bank details, checking whether they are set up as one-time vendors, and numerous other different configuration sets here. So again, what we can see here is that we've got multiple different requirements, different changes that are going forward. And again, we've got an access orientated change. So the people who are authorized to change vendor master details, and we've got no users that don't meet that specific exclusion criteria. So you may have already mitigated users who you know and want to have that access, but anyone outside of that range should come up with a failure. We've also then got some payment checks to make sure whether there are any duplicate invoice checks from a coded perspective or whether there are any changes to bank details within the past month. Now we've got some other checks here, one that's failed a high priority test and one that's a proposed medium one. And this one's just a simple list of one-time vendors in the system just to flag for review. And we can see we've got 25 of those based upon the check indicator in the configuration that it's a one-time vendor. So again, we all need to know that one-time vendors are great in a lot of cases, emergency procurements, for example, but you don't really want to rely on one-time vendors purely in your operational environment. If you've got an overall percentage that's going up for one-time vendors, then maybe your procurement team aren't doing such a great job in strategic procurement decisions. But what's the interesting one is looking at the checks and balances to allow for bank detail changes or to actually allow that there are differences in those accounts. So what we can see here is that actually something has violated this figure that's saying that the account type of K can be changed. So it allows people to just update the vendor bank details for those specific types of accounts and just change that whenever they like in effect. So that would lead you to suspect that maybe people are changing the bank details for those vendors more frequently. Maybe it's indicative of a control process failure and that there's something going on within the configuration setting that you don't really want. So again, multiple examples of where you've got different control checks that can come together, highlighting various different issues that could be important from a governance perspective, all without having to forensically go in and check each and every one of those data records on a daily or an hourly or a weekly basis. So lots of different efficiency gains to be had there from that perspective. Now with all of these things, you can choose how you want to remediate them. You can assign a plan and actually work that through to completion, or you can close it and say, we've already got a plan, this is a repeat issue, we don't mind. We can reassign the issue, create exceptions and allow those to be logged into the system, or we can void it as a non-issue. So in this case, I'm going to close that without a plan just because I can. So there we go. We supposed that that was the case, and we just submit that ticket to be removed. There we go. So just to loop back into the content that we were talking about before with posting periods, Again, we've got a rule that's set up for that to look at the particular instances of configuration setting in that T001B table, which everybody knows very well, which is governing the posting periods. So again, we've got a deficiency here reported to us by the bot. We can go into the evaluation criteria and we can see that actually the prior posting period is open for the particular company code in the posting period that we want. So we can see that there's actually posting period 1 in 2002 is actually open for changes. So somebody can go back 17 years into the past and start messing around with the company's financial statements, potentially posting journals into that. It's exactly the same process as before. We can actually say that we can do something with that issue, we can understand what's going on with it, and we can make a decision based upon the fact of what's actually happening. We could also tag them as an exception and say, you know what, we knew about this one. It's not relevant, perfectly authorized. So we could suggest that as an exception and submit it accordingly. And done. So back to our scenarios. We've already spoken about this and shown you the demo for integrating the access control side of things into these risk assessments. But what we're saying there is that it's all very well to have the ability to run those access control checks, but unless you run them, then it's actually not going to deliver that business value and that business insight as to whether that control is effective. So configuring those automated checks of effectiveness and getting the GRC tool via the RPA function to actually run that control check and integrating it with the standard configuration settings really does deliver a great deal more efficiency to the process, but it also strengthens the control environment as well, because you can guarantee that those checks are actually being performed rather than somebody just saying, yes, 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 I've reviewed the access risks. So we've already shown you that as part of the vendor master setup and the ability to change those exchange rates. So moving on, looking at the master data is also really key, as well as looking at the configuration settings. Because master data is probably the area of most concern for an operational perspective. Now, although that might not mean that the data issues are completely removed, it's actually far more reliable if you can do that more consistently and increase the number of tests that you can make across a calendar year, and actually being able to put that into the position that the robot is checking it rather than the human. So you're also then relying on the ability for that repeatable task to be automated and less prone to human error. So we've already checked some of those with the one-time vendor setup, but let's see if we can find the one with duplicate payment indicators against the vendor master record. So back to our technology screen, and we'll see if we can find that one. There we are. Check changes to duplicate invoice check. So once again, we've got some issues here that we've got raised to us, and we can actually see that on those vendor masters. So we can see whether the indicator's been set, and in this case we can see that 44 has not been, and that there's a programmatic exception on some of these. So here, rather than just checking the configuration settings, we're actually checking the master data and seeing that actually all of these vendors don't have the check flag in the data setup for having a duplicate invoice or credit check. And again, that means that the vendor could be at risk of receiving multiple different payments from the same potential piece of work. Not something that we particularly want to enable out of the box. So that gives us good insight into whether our master data is set up appropriately to be able to actually control the financial processes of vendor master data maintenance. So again, looking at that from an RPA perspective, we're able to do far more checks, 100% completeness checks on all of our vendor masters through the same automated controls. So there's no additional effort from a human to actually go in there and substantively check each and every vendor that's actually been set up in your system. If you ran that as a daily control, looking for new vendors or looking for existing vendors, you could have complete coverage that your environment is locked down and secure from potential duplicate payments. Doesn't mean to say that those payments may not be proposed, and we'll come on to that in just a second in the demo. So, as I've just said, transactional insight is almost critical, and that's where a lot of companies are looking to get more validation from a duplicate invoices perspective, and also trying to use a lot more of the RPA technology to get greater coverage, improve the control environment, and also just get better at controlling what's going on within your business. Now, duplicate invoices sound really simple to analyze, but in actual fact it's really quite hard. So the issue with duplicate invoices is there's sometimes subjectivity. It's not just one thing about the invoice that could make it suspicious or duplicated. It could be that it's been sent twice by accident. It could be because there was late notice from the actual automated billing systems where the bill has been paid in the meantime, but in actual fact a dunning letter has been received and recognised as an invoice and put into the system twice, either accidentally or just because the automation processes in that area fail. It could also be that there is a deliberate attempt to actually defraud the organisation. So it could well be that the member of staff has actually duplicated that invoice deliberately, or it could be just mistakes between two clerks working on the invoice, think that it's a different one, they didn't actually talk, or there wasn't any matching done from there, or it could be some sort of data issue within the business partner itself or within the invoice itself. So there could be various different false positives to see whether or not there's actually a duplicate invoice rather than it's definitely is or definitely isn't. So it does require some sort of insight there. Now the way that we can do that is via a different tool called business integrity screening. So this actually allows us to correlate multiple different factors together and propose whether or not there is sufficient evidence to suggest that it's suspicious. So in this kind of context, you've got various different detection methods, as you can see down at the bottom, which could correlate and catalogue up all of the different aspects as to what might make an invoice duplicated. And you can then define a threshold that says, I need more than one of those to match, otherwise it's probably just a bit of a mistake. So we've applied scorings to each of these different attributes, and so you can see you can have a greater significance to one or the other. Now in this case, we've got the same amount giving 30 points, same vendor giving 10 points, an invoice without a PO reference is another 10 points, and a vendor invoice reference duplicate. So they've quoted a reference and it's the duplicate reference. So it may be the invoice number or it may be the purchase order number. So it may also be a typo on that particular environment. Now what we also can say is that we don't need all of these to be triggered, but we just need enough to give us certainty that it might be a duplicate invoice. So what we can say here is that the vendor invoice item is anything that scores greater than 70 against all of these different checks. So we could have tolerances programmatically set, but we allocate a weighting or a point system to them. So if it has a vendor invoice duplicate reference and it has the same amount, that's 60 points. So it doesn't yet trigger. So basically we're looking for both of these and any one of it being the same vendor or without a PO reference. So it has to really tick at least 3 of those boxes before it will become an actual suspicious item. And we can then programmatically put that into the system and find any of those invoices that match that particular criteria. So let's have a look at that and see if we can get that moving. So here we have business integrity screening, and what we're going to look at is the number of alerts that have been raised. So we've got an alert in here that looks to be a potential duplicate invoice. So what we can see from here is the alert ID, and as we click into there, we'll then get the details of the alert. So we can see that it's all about finding duplicate invoices. We've got the due dates, we've got a risk rating, a risk score, risk factor, and the potential value at risk as well. So if we go into the detection area, we can see how that's been detected, We can see the detection object is the potential duplicate invoice, and we can see the document numbers, the company codes, when it was posted, and what the potential duplicate is. We can go into more details of the threshold violations and the actual methods of it as well, and see line by line what the details were, what the scores are, and what the commentary around that is. So what's the actual evaluation criteria? Same bank details, but not the same vendor for the first document. And then we can see that there's a potential duplicate because the reference number of the first document is very, very similar to the reference document of the second. So fuzzy search saying there may be a typo, and we've also got similar amounts within the tolerance of the range that what we're looking for. So it doesn't have to be absolute, but it has to be within a certain correlation or certain range. So if we go into the network analysis side of things, that puts it into a graphical way that we can see the correlation between the data sets. So there's the same bank account stored against two different vendors. Now that doesn't seem right, does it? But then we've got the first document, and we can step through, open that document, and just have a look at it. So this is prompting us to go into our S4 environment to actually look at the documents itself. Hopefully that'll work, and we can go straight in. There we have it. So we can see the amounts, we can see that document, and we should be able to open that and actually look at the invoice itself. There it is, part of the attachment. So there we can see the vendor, the invoice number, we can see the payments and the values, and we can see exactly what it's for. Now the important thing to note there is a discount of 2% if paid within 5 days. So that could be the way in which that discrepancy in the invoice value has come about. So we'll just hold on to that thought for later. Now if we look at the second document, we can compare that and see whether or not it is a duplicate. So it looks sort of similar. Same kind of order of magnitude in terms of the actual value. And let's just find that again and open that document. There we go. Looks very similar to me. So a slight typo, similar sorts of order of magnitude in terms of the sponsorship package that's being asked for, and we can think that the discrepancy on the actual values may well be due to the early payment terms. Now what we've got to ask ourselves is, what do we do about it? So first we can assign that to a processor to investigate it. That's changed the life cycle. We can then look through and make sure that we've got the right sort of detection strategies, and we can see the activities that's gone on there. And we can then proceed to make a decision. So we've identified that it's actually a successful hit. We can show that we've actually found a potential duplicate invoice, and we've confirmed that it is a duplicate invoice. We can see the activity trail coming up there. That means that it's all properly authorized and complete. And we can now proceed with actually getting that to the right processor who's actually authorized to then document that decision. So we've done the initial triage of the identification that it's actually a problem. So now we'll log on with a different user who's authorized to resolve the problem and actually process that to a position of completeness. So we've got a remediation alert there. So now we can go in and process that remediation. There's our remediation plan. Again, we can see the high-level details. We've got the risk factors, we've got the detection strategies, we've understood what it is, and we can validate that the detection methods are still in place. So that's the information that should be sent to the resolving party. We can again see the network analysis that draws it all together, similar to what we saw before. So we've had an investigation and we've got the plausibility trip. We've assigned it to ourselves, and then we can update what that information is. So we can say there was a typo on the reference number. And as we highlighted earlier, the amount was different due to the early payment terms. What we can also put in here is that we've actually found that there's a duplicate vendor in the systems as well. So why we've got the same bank account details for two different vendors is something that we definitely need to check up and process further. So from that perspective, we've got a decision. We can complete the remediation, say that we've done that. The remediation is completed, and that should now send that back to our previous person, M. Rossi. So we've done our job as the investigating officer, and we can now go back and just check that that issue has been adequately resolved. So we just log in and confirm that. So rather than it being a new investigation alert, we've now got an alert from a remediation completed point of view. And we can check the outcomes, we can validate that that alert has been adequately resolved, and if we're happy with that, we can then close the alert. So again, we've got all the header details, we've still got the alert open, but we've got a proposal that the remediation is completed, and we can see the updates that May has put into this ticket. So from that perspective, happy with that, we can complete that, say we're fine with it, put the summary in of what we found. It was a confirmed duplicate payment, and we can document what we did. We can document the financial outcome if we want to. We'll put that as 0 because we've actually reversed this all out and stopped that payment from happening. So that's completed, all done, all dusted. Duplicate payment references found within an SAP context based upon a robot checking for those coded matches within an invoice processing process. And there we have it. So those are the key demos that we wanted to show today in terms of making those tangible improvements from a financial controlling perspective. Now I know that we're quite short on time here, and there are a few other demo scenarios. Obviously I would hope that's triggered your thought processes as to where you might apply this sort of technology. Certainly we've got one with embargo checks and automatically blocking those potential payments by actually putting the block on either the vendor or the payment itself. Perhaps we'll save them for another webinar. So stay tuned to see whether we can deliver further greater insights into this automated control world from a robotic process automation perspective. But on that note, I'd like to hand back to Michael and Craig just to summarize the webinar, and look forward to hearing from you soon if you don't have any questions for now or in the near future. Many thanks for your attention, and I hope that you found it exceptionally useful. Cheers, guys.